Well, let me introduce you. John Ford, a San Mateo County resident like myself. You're the executive director of commute.org, which has a less well-known name. And I thought maybe you could, for guests of How to Meet Your Neighbor, tell folks a little bit about what commute.org is and what you do.
Sure. Thanks again for the invitation to join you tonight. So, commute.org is the name that we roll with and everybody knows us by, but we're officially known as the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance. And that is the official government name. We're actually a public agency, and we are what's called a joint powers authority. And so we actually have 20 different members, which are cities and towns in the county of San Mateo. And together, when they first put us together as an organization back in 2000, that was the official name, and we were the Alliance, otherwise known as the Alliance. And then one of my predecessors had the wisdom to get the domain name of commute.org. And when I got here in 2012, we made the decision to start going by the commute.org name rather than the Peninsula Traffic Congestion Relief Alliance. It's still a little crazy because people still get a lot of our tax documents and things like that, and they see the long name, and it's like, well, who is that? But the Alliance and commute.org, we are one and the same.
Well, I think for our audience that don't know much about congestion relief and how the government takes an active role in trying to mitigate traffic congestion, for an audience who are listening in on How to Meet Your Neighbor, I do think this is a super relevant topic because how trapped in congestion you are affects your mood and your likelihood of positive interactions with your neighbors. And I think transportation demand management or transit demand management, TDM, is a super interesting topic. For folks who don't know San Mateo County, what would you describe are some of the unique characteristics about congestion where we're situated and some of the unique maybe solutions?
Sure. No, we are unique, and we're a county with lots of small cities. None of our cities are really large. Even the largest of our cities are relatively small. And the reason why an agency like mine, which is this combination of, as I mentioned, 20 different public agencies that are kind of working together, is that this is too much of a task for any individual city to take on, and it's really difficult. As we all know, traffic is not local to one city, right? You can't control what happens if you're within the city of San Mateo or if you're in Colma. Most of your traffic isn't generated by the people who live there. It's the people who are traveling through it, or maybe coming to work there, or possibly starting their day there or ending their day there. But in the meantime, they're creating traffic and congestion throughout the county and actually throughout the region. So the reason why transportation demand management agencies are kind of better suited at the regional level, and in our case the county level, is because that allows us to work across all those various cities and look at traffic and transportation issues across that broader regional area. And we are supported, and we do have similar agencies in other counties, not exactly structured the way that we are, because some of those counties that are dominated by larger individual cities, say Oakland or San Jose, San Francisco, they tend to have different structures than we do. But in San Mateo County, it really works out well. This is a nice way of handling it. And each city, or in this case, the county, is required to do some traffic mitigation and congestion management efforts. That's why we talk about it as congestion relief. Sometimes people think it's like you're going to go to the ENT, but congestion relief isn't about your nose. It's really about the traffic and the congestion, not just on highways, but on local roads and everywhere where there's vehicular traffic. We tend to have congestion. Anybody who's lived in San Mateo County for any length of time knows that it's gotten worse, and it's going to just keep getting that way unless we really, work together to come up with some solutions.
So I realize that it's not just about mitigating congestion and the tools may be available to do that. It may also simply be tracking how bad congestion is or where congestion is. So is that part of commute.org's mission, is to track this stuff over time?
Uh, Not so much. We do have, I would say that that's more in the program partner areas that a lot of the work that the Transportation Authority does, and CCAG, another one of those acronyms, the City County Association of Governments. Actually, CCAG is the Congestion Management Agency, otherwise known as a CMA, for San Mateo County, and it's kind of in their area to kind of do the monitoring. They do a lot of the data analysis and of the highway and freeway traffic and access to those major thoroughfares. We come in more at the programmatic level. What can we do to help? While we do have a lot of data about our programs and our services, and we are really interested in knowing how people commute, when they commute, what their preferences are, and what those changes look like over time. We're not out there doing the driveway counts and the freeway counts and kind of looking at all of that. That information is all there. It's really valuable to know, but that's not really within our purview.
Got you. So for maybe a state of things in San Mateo County, is there some way to measure the distribution of transportation choices that folks are making? And I realize some of the tools in the tool chest for commute.org or any PDM management association, the goal is to relieve congestion by persuading folks maybe to try alternatives or change the timing of trips. So what's kind of the state of things in San Mateo, given COVID happened
Oh, yeah.
5 years ago, and the lingering effects on people's trip demand and choices? What's the current state of things?
Well, it has been a slow recovery post-COVID. I think that it's really interesting, right? So there's we rely on survey data of residents to kind of find out where we stand on what's called the drive alone rate, right? What we're interested in doing as an agency is reducing the number of people who drive alone. Anything that's shared, whether you're sharing your car in a carpool or a van pool or transit, any of those options, those are all in our way of thinking better than the solo driving, right? So driving alone is what we're always trying to measure, and then what are the other options that people are using. Oh, by the way, bicycling, I can't forget to mention that, because some of our neighbors who are the hardcore cyclists, we love our cyclists, and they do amazing work. We also like people who are remote working, and that actually maybe is kind of gets back to the question that you were asking about, is where are we now and where were we when we came out of COVID? So remote work was really always accounted for just about 5-6% of the overall workforce, was kind of a regular permanent work from home, remote work types of folks before the pandemic. Drive alone rates were in that 70% range, and then everybody else in between that 24-25% was a mixture of transit and bicycling, carpool, walking, so forth. Then March 17th, 2020 hits, and we just passed that 5-year anniversary date. That's when the lockdown started. And all of a sudden, the drive alone rate plummeted, right? Because no one was driving alone to work, because a lot of people weren't working. And if they were working, they were working remotely. And as a TDM agency, where your whole objective is to get people to not drive alone, it was almost like, wait a minute, what have we done? Like, we've met our targets, we've met our goals, right? No one's driving, or those people who are driving are the ones who are the essential workers, and we need them to be able to get to their workplaces to do the essential work that they were doing. But the drive alone rate went down to something like 30%. And it was just this magic, and we all wondered in the TDM world, like, if we just did COVID put us out of business? Are we no longer needed because, the problem has been solved? Unfortunately for through something very tragic, but it did all of a sudden change the whole dynamic. Everybody knows how easy it was to basically get around on the highways. It wasn't so easy in local towns. People were still driving there, but it was an interesting time. And then as we came out of it, and people started coming back to the office more, the essential workers were already there. A lot of people were always had never not gone to the office, but as it started coming back, there was hesitancy for people to go back into transit, carpooling and vanpooling for some of those social distancing reasons, right? And so we're fully aware of that. That was going on. People had a lot of patience. People took their time getting there. The other thing that happened, Max, was that people found that it was pretty easy to drive alone at that point. It wasn't as bad. The congestion hadn't come back to the way it was. The commute was spread out. They were able to travel down 101 or 280 El Camino and really get to where they wanted to go in their own vehicles and not really have to deal with the public, not have to deal with congestion. And that kind of was, unfortunately, the nirvana that we had with the drive alone rate dropping so low during COVID. All of a sudden it turned around and it went back the other way. And we're still struggling to get out of that. And so while we are recovering and we are still increasing transit, ridership and carpool activity and vanpool activity, even bicycling is still on the increase. Every month we're seeing month over month gains in participation in our programs, and our survey data shows that more and more people are returning to transit. You'll hear about that on the news with Caltrain and BART and the ferry and so forth. We are seeing that. It's just that the increase in people's use of sustainable commuting is increasing at a decreasing rate, right? So we're not returning quite the way that we had before, and so we still have a lot of behavior modification to do to get people to consider their options, which is another part of the conversation is all about behavior modification.
Well, I would love to cover that. One thing I'll ask first, though, right before we get into strategies and tactics of behavior modifications, is knowing that the San Francisco Bay Area region, which San Mateo County is a part of, has the lowest return to office rates in the country of the US due to being so tech heavy and permitting such remote work lifestyle, I suppose.
Sure.
In your role, do you interact with any of these big employers who have the ability to mandate a return to office? And what's sort of the rationale and thought process about these big employers remaining to be situated in this county if they're not mandating return to office? And I can speak for myself as an individual that I choose to reside here because it's awesome and I like being here, but I understand that the economics on the employer side might be very different, where they might be seeking out talent who live in a lower cost of living place and can command less pay. So do you, in your role, interact with these big employers in the county, and how are they thinking about their talent policies as it relates to requiring a commute?
No, it's a great question, and it is tricky. And it's not just the large employers. Yes, we do work with employers of all sizes throughout the county, and we actually have been a partner with the Bay Area Council. You may have heard of them. They work with lots of large employers, and they do a survey, and they did surveys coming out of COVID. And we just got the results of a recent survey that they did in the month of February, asking these employers, large, medium, small employers, kind of what their policies were. Are they set? Are they increasing? Do they anticipate bringing more people back into the office? Are people complying with those mandates when they put them out there? And I can tell you that that there is it's still fluid. The larger employers in particular are feeling the need to bring their employees back into the office more. I think it kind of feels like it's stuck at that 3-day a week for those types of employers that are office based. That 3-day a week seems to be the sweet spot, and I think that will probably be sticky there. There's other industries that are more lab based in the biotech sector and so forth. Those are different, right? Those require a different level of in person, and then of course there's anything that requires that fully in person, and they've already been back, and those plans aren't changing. But it's a double-edged sword, and I mentioned to you before that we were celebrating the remote work options for people for a very long time, and we still do, because the other, I'll use one more acronym, and hopefully our neighbors that are getting to know us don't mind my acronyms
as
too
long
often.
as you explain it. As long as you explain it.
So we talked about single occupant vehicle travel, and that's the SOV, right? And we used to have a little catchy jingle and trying to get people's attention by saying, "Don't be an SOV," right? And so, but the other one that we talk about a lot is VMT, and that's called vehicle miles traveled. And so what we're really trying to do is try to minimize the amount of vehicle miles traveled. So if you're traveling from city A to city B to go to work, and that's 10 miles, you've traveled 10 miles. That's 10 vehicle miles traveled. Obviously, if you're doing that in both directions, you have a 20-mile daily VMT for your commute. If there are two people in that car, and you've now cut that in half, right? Your commute is still the same, both directions, but because there's two of you, instead of having double that amount, you have half of that, and so forth, right? So what we're really trying to do is reduce the VMT, because that's the key to congestion relief, is doing that. A remote workday is 0 VMT. So if you sit in the chair that you're in today and you do your workday there, and you maybe go out and walk down to the grocery store or go to get your cup of coffee, your vehicle miles traveled for that day would be 0. And so that day where you don't go into the office, you don't go to your place of work, you don't get in your vehicle, even if you don't really get into any other mode, right? Your VMT is at 0. And so we're celebrating that. We're encouraging that. We're very supportive of that. The flip side to that is when people aren't going to their workplaces, then they're not on transit, and we don't have people riding Caltrain, and we don't have people on Samtrans, and the shuttles that we operate at less than capacity, and so, and the coffee shops that are closer to those places don't have the foot traffic and the revenue that they used to have, and so societally, it's tricky how much remote work is good, and yet from a purist perspective, if I'm trying to reduce single occupant vehicle trips and vehicle miles traveled, the more people that can work remotely, the longer that they can remote work that way, the better. However, the gotcha on that as well is, as we all know, that any of us who've had the opportunity to work remotely, a lot of trips take place even on those remote work days, and people are going in their cars and traveling around and doing their errands and maybe making more trips during the day than they would otherwise if they were at their workplace. And while that's a great work-life balance and there's some real benefits to that, we can't ignore the fact that remote work it's not as pure as we would like to think it is from a VMT perspective.
Definitely. I imagine, though, it can be measured whether, it's a commute trip or a errand trip by a work from home denizen.
It can be. Just don't ask the employees, because when you ask the employees, of course they never get out of their chair and leave when they're remote working, right? They're always at the work spot.
Can I ask you a historical question about the region? Because this is sort of a phenomenon I realize began maybe 20-ish years ago, with the rise of the corporate private shuttle. And it's something that I've been a beneficiary of as an employee, is with big employers that have large enough workforces, they can justify buying literal buses as assets on their balance sheets that they can depreciate, and operating once or even twice, maybe even 3 times a day shuttles from shuttle stops around the region, not just the county in which they've got offices. And I heard some wild statistic, I think it was in a Wired article, about how the corporate private bus ridership has some order of magnitude more daily ridership than even the county transit agencies like ours and Samtrans. And I was wondering if those statistics that I've heard apocryphally are actually true, and just how massively do these private shuttles undercut the ridership of the public transit options, whether bus or train?
Great question. And I'm glad you've had the opportunity to experience it, because I think that most of us just see them, and your first reaction, especially when you used to see them kind of maybe during the heyday, right? I'm in the late 20-teens, I guess. It felt like they were everywhere and everybody was on them except the average person, right? And it didn't have a great feel. Again, put yourself in our position as TDM professionals trying to reduce single occupant vehicle trips and worried about VMT. Corporate shuttles are good. They are putting a lot of people in fewer vehicles and reducing VMT. And it is something that, while we're not involved in organizing them or supporting them or providing any kind of funding for them, I would much rather have those employees riding those corporate shuttles than getting in their cars and driving separately. Even getting in multiple cars and driving in carpools, it's still better for them to be consolidated into a single van or a single coach, as it may be. It may not feel very equitable, and it may feel like it's those of us that are going to be using public transit instead of those private shuttles. It may feel a little off-putting to see that or to support that. And yet, from a congestion perspective, it really is good. I think we might be able to talk about express lanes at some point, and one of the goals of the express lanes was to get these corporate shuttles, give them a way to get into a lane and be able to travel faster so that they're not clogging up the regular lanes, but also because they're carrying lots of people. And it's really a supplement to public transit. Public transit can't do the routes, as you know, the way that the Bay Area is structured with 27 different transit agencies. A lot of these vehicles that we're seeing, these corporate shuttles, they're coming from cross-county lines, and most of our transit doesn't operate cross-county. The few routes that we do where we have public support for that, say the Foster City Express is an example of a very successful route that does something similar to what those private coaches do. But those are few and far between. So in the meantime, we're supporters of them. We think that we'd much rather have them riding in those than driving alone.
Got you. No, it makes sense. I will say I'll speak to the inequitable aspect of it, because I see this firsthand, is how, one, it totally does cannibalize ridership from multi-county or inter-county transit options. I mean, people are riding these private employer shuttles quite far, like you say. Like there's very popular San Francisco to Santa Clara County route that skips San Mateo County entirely. East Bay, Alameda County to Santa Clara County, Alameda into San Francisco. All these pretty long distance, even the Tri-Valley area like Dublin, Pleasanton into Santa Clara County is very popular.
Yeah, I would just add, though, that they're really expensive to operate those services. I mean, really expensive, right? So these companies that are doing this are doing so at great expense, but they're doing it for a reason. They're attracting and retaining talent. And that's one of the ways that they do it. It's a benefit to those employees. They know it. I can speak into, say, the biotech industry. So many of the folks as biotech is, yes, it's in San Francisco, South San Francisco, but it's in many other cities. But it's also out in the East Bay and all the way up through the Sacramento area. And so a lot of the scientists that they're trying to attract live in the East Bay and the Far East Bay. And so biotech, as an example, is using that as an opportunity to bring in that talent from those places. It's really expensive to do, though. And so, yeah, I mean, it's got to be rewarding. Now, going to your question of whether or not the ridership on those services dwarfs the public transit, I don't think so. There's still a lot more people that are relying on the local county transit agencies for that shorter distance commutes. But yes, some of those longer ones are definitely that, riding on the corporate coaches. What would they use as an alternative? Would they make 3 transfers and use BART and Caltrain to get to where they're going? Probably not. And if they were willing to do it, even with a subsidized transit fares, if that was getting these companies all the talent that they needed, they sure as heck wouldn't be running really expensive motor coaches, but it didn't, so they obviously are doing it. We'll see how the economy goes, right? I mean, those are one of those things that those are some of the perks that change when economic times aren't quite as good as they've been. So we'll see, and the public transit will hopefully still be there to carry them when it comes time.
Totally. Yeah, I can speak to my peers and their transportation preferences. And the bus these days is the private employer shuttle is not full. It also wasn't full pre-COVID, at least my routes from San Mateo County.
No. And some of the employers that we do work with, then I can anecdotally tell you, I mean, they have definitely cut service, and they've done consolidation of service. And so they're not immune, they can't just provide all of that service. And because I said before, it's really expensive, and they do operate, almost like many transit agencies within their own company. Now, some of the companies, there's one here in South San Francisco, has a large fleet of these motor coaches, and they opened it up to other employers to participate in the program with them. So they're selling seats on the shuttles that they're operating, long haul shuttles, and opening it up to other employers in the area. 2 reasons. One is they've got extra seats and capacity, and it makes more sense to run a full coach than half a coach, or half full coach. And the other reason is, if those employers are all kind of located in the same area, we have a congestion issue out in South San Francisco. And so the more companies that are participating together in these shared services, the fewer vehicles there will be coming in and out of South San Francisco. And that is one of the real reasons why, TDM is something that we practice as a public agency, but lots of larger employers and large organizations are also doing the same kind of thing, maybe for slightly different purposes or reasons. But at the end of the day, if we're reducing vehicle miles traveled and single occupant vehicle trips, we don't care how it gets done.
Well, as viewers of the show might know, I'm a massive cheerleader for multi-user transportation options or active transportation choices like walking, biking, combined with carpooling, bus, train, ferry. And for a simple reason, which is that it gives you more opportunity to meet people. It's a very pro-social way to live your life. It reduces a great deal of traffic violence is another big one for me. But the reality is that single occupancy vehicle trips are still very dominant. Like you described, the majority of commutes in our region. And to the behavior modification strategies, one thing that's huge, and I know we could spend a lot of time on, is the free parking issue. or the free parking fringe benefit
Mm,
that
mm.
employers provide. And it's gone beyond free parking, at least at my employer. I don't speak for my employer. I'll just note that not only is free parking offered, but free EV charging is
Mm,
offered.
yeah.
And not only free EV charging, but valet contractors will rotate EVs around the limited chargers available in the parking garage. And this is a sort of extreme fringe benefit. While I take the corporate shuttle, I don't know what the all-in costs are, but this is a untaxed benefit today. And I'm aware, I don't think our audience are aware, that there is a state law on the books in California allowing parking cash out, I believe is what it's called, for some employees who work for a very strictly defined type of employer who offers free parking, allowing employees to take the cash value in lieu of using a parking space at the office or at their employer. So I know this hasn't been revisited very closely. There's a state senator, Alex Lee in Santa Clara County, who recently proposed making this a real thing with teeth in it, where today a lot of employers and employees are exempt from this rule, which would really change people's transportation incentives. I think the loophole is that if the employers, well, it only applies to employers under 58 employees or something like that, maybe 25. And then on top of that, it only applies if the employer's offices or premises have separate leases for the building and the parking. And
Correct.
so that allows them to determine the cash value of the parking spaces. But that's all fanciful. It doesn't exist, at least in a real form.
Parking cash out.
Yeah.
Parking is that where you want to go on this
Oh,
question?
totally.
Or?
Let's go in.
Oh, parking cash out is that's a rabbit hole that's pretty deep here. But it was a strategy and still is a strategy more in the urban locations where and it kind of got started really with employers who were paying for their parking in parking garages at their facility. So San Francisco back in the day, lots of parking garages, lots of employers were paying for their employees' parking. And the concept of the parking cash out was, wait a minute, if you're going to pay Max to drive his car and allow him to park there, you're going to pay for his parking. Shouldn't you pay John if he doesn't drive his car? And wouldn't that be an incentive for maybe Max not to drive his car as well, as if he didn't take the $250 a month that it costs for the parking spot, and instead he could put that into his pocket instead, right, to use it to pay for his transit and so forth. And that's really that's the basic concept of parking cash out. And you're right, it doesn't work well where when you're in an office building or in a retail location or at a hotel where there's no charged parking for the employees, it doesn't work out the same way. So tying parking cash out to where you led with this was behavior modification. That's really what we're talking about, right? It's carrots and sticks. How do I get, what are the incentives that I can provide to someone, or what are the disincentives I can provide to keep people from driving alone? Why is the drive alone rate into San Francisco 40%, and in Santa Clara County it's 80%? It's kind of more of a rhetorical question, but the reason is because in San Francisco it's really expensive to park, and there's no parking spaces. So even if you do find one to put someplace to park, it's going to be really expensive. And so people don't drive there because there are transit options, right? But it's mostly because it's expensive and hard. And yet, if you work in San Mateo County, in most places, Santa Clara County for sure, parking's plentiful, parking's free. The office parks as they exist today, especially with people working remote schedules, You can take 2 or 3 parking spaces and nobody even cares because there aren't enough cars to fill up the spaces that you're parking in. So I joke, but it's not so funny I mean, I can solve the TDM problem. I can solve the drive alone rate. I can solve the VMT problem. You just charge a whole lot for parking everywhere, and people will now find their alternatives. And that's one motivation for behavior modification. But that doesn't work for everybody, right? There are still going to be a group of people who say, you know what, I like to drive my car. I will drive my car. I will park my car, and I'll either pay for it, the parking, or I will find some hidden parking spot and take my chances on it. And that's really, but again, if I can motivate most people not to do that, and there are viable options to manage that work-life balance, then people will take advantage of that, right? If driving my car takes me, and this is what we hear every day, right? It takes me 45 minutes to drive by car, and it takes me 2 hours each way by transit. My time and my work-life balance, it's not worth it to me, is what people say, to spend those 2 hours in transit. I would rather spend 45 minutes in my car and pay for parking if I have to, than take 4 hours out of my day, 2 hours each way, to make that same commute. And so it's a really tricky thing. We do know what the solution is. The solution is make parking expensive and not plentiful. How do we get there policy-wise? How do we do it in such a way that, the zealots, who are the good cyclists and transit riders and everything else, they're going to end up with a lot of non-friendly neighbors if you say, I can't, I'm going to take, it's now going to take you 4 hours a day to commute, whereas it would take an hour and a half if you do it by car.
Yeah, not a compelling sales pitch, not a popular political.
No. But you can see, though, why we are supporters of the remote work thing, because those days when you aren't doing that, again, we talked about the VMT reduction, but it's not hard for me to convince you to work from home 2 days a week and not add to the congestion. Now, if you can let me charge for parking, maybe I can convince Max and John to carpool, because now the cost for us to park is half, because we're going to share the cost of fuel is half, cost of electricity, whatever it's going to be for our cars. Yeah, so we'll see. I think those days of the free electric vehicle charging is going to go away. So you were mentioning that at your current employer. I'd venture it's hard to take those things away from your employees once you've given it to them, but I've seen plenty of corporate cafeterias go away as well. So, those people who are relying on free charging, I don't know. I don't think that's there forever.
Anecdotally, I can share that parking permits have now been issued. So there's now tracking of utilization and ability to control the maximum outstanding permits issued. Maybe it was under the guise of security. I'm not sure. But the other anecdote I want to share is a very young coworker, straight out of college, bought a car because of the EV charging, the free EV charging. So these benefits are really influential on lifestyle choice. And circling back to the shuttle topic, private employer shuttle or public transit option, is they have effect on housing decisions. And I read a study that tech employer shuttle locations affected home values, residential real estate values within a half mile of shuttle stops in San Francisco was the study, as I recollect it. So
all true. And again, it makes sense. And if you can take advantage of those, again, I encourage you to ride them and don't drive your car. Even if it's an EV, right? And that's the other thing, right? So congestion doesn't talk about air quality. It is the two are obviously related, right? When we're dealing with only combustion engines, then all congestion is bad. But EV, you still are adding to the congestion, which is causing other delays and causes other issues. So I'm glad you're in an, I'd rather have you in an EV than a gas powered vehicle, but it's still not great for the overall congestion. Can I go back to behavior modification? I don't think we really kind of hit it hard enough, because I think that one of the things that we realize, and I think, hopefully your viewers and listeners are looking for this as well, which is that everyone has their different motivations for what's going to incentivize them to make a change. And so that's one of the challenges of TDM, is that there is no just one recipe, right? As I mentioned before, you can't just make as a tool make parking expensive, because there's some people who that just won't matter to them, right? We have a lot of different rewards and incentive programs at commute.org, and we use those, and different people take advantage of them differently, right? So we offer up to $100 of rewards for people who choose to bicycle to work, or carpool to work, or vanpool to work. And we have all sorts of tools and matching programs to help them find partners for each of those different modes. And those are incentives that we're using, carrots that we're trying to put out there to help people to try to make those changes. But it doesn't work for everybody. We have another program called the Guaranteed Ride Home program. And if you use any of those modes, public transit or bicycling or carpooling or any of those modes, and something happens in the middle of the day, right? That's one of the great concerns that people have, is if I don't have my car, what happens if I hear from the dog sitter that my dog's sick and I need to go home, or I get a call from the school and I need to get home to see my child, or I don't feel well, right? And I need to get home quickly. Or in the case of a carpool, what happens if my carpool partner, who's the driver, had to leave because he didn't feel well? How do I now get home? So we run this Guaranteed Ride Home program, and we will pay for the cost of your trip to either the local transit station or all the way to your location, up to $60 in transit and in fares, and you can use it either in Uber or Lyft or taxi. There's a bunch of different ways that you can use it. But the idea is it's insurance. It's insurance that says that, hey, if you are willing to use one of these modes that we think is beneficial and helps to reduce congestion, we got your back. We know you're doing something that's hard, because it's harder than driving alone in many cases. But let's at least make sure that you have a way to get where you need to go without having to worry about the cost and the timing of it. And that's, again, one of the kinds of things that we do. Is that an incentive or a reward? It's just one of the programs that we offer, and I think it's important. But again, everybody's motivation is different.
Totally. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up this topic, because it's very contemporaneous. Self-driving cars are entering San Mateo County. They started in San Francisco County. They're not very extensive in their service coverage area yet, but they will probably be. I don't know what the utilization looks like in San Francisco, really. I myself actually have not ridden in a Waymo. I'm guessing you have, as a.
I have not, and I'm itching to. So it's on my.
We should get up there together and give it a try.
There you go.
Or in the county, I think it's in
Millbrae.
Millbrae. Okay.
Yeah, they're in Millbrae. As a matter of fact, I will tell you, before you get to your real question, the reason I love Waymo, or self-driving cars of that ilk, but Waymo in particular, because they are there. I live in Millbrae, and I live at the intersection of two very busy streets, and it's a 4-way stop. And the Waymo and my wife are the only two cars that come to a complete full stop at that stop sign. Everyone else rolls through that stop sign, blows through that stop sign, but these autonomous vehicles, because of the way they're programmed and trained, they come to complete and full stops. It's the safest car in the neighborhood by far, except for my wife, of course.
Well, we do not need to sell them too hard because they've got plenty of paid professional marketers.
I'm just
working
saying,
around the clock.
from a safe driving perspective, so far my experience has been thumbs up. But
Fair, yeah.
what do you think? I mean, what's your question as it relates to congestion management and TDM and commute.org? I mean, what do you want to know our thoughts on those?
I guess the thing that's really on my mind is the effect that they will have on our community. And I very much appreciate the point you're making about the safety that they adhere to in a way that you just can't expect a human to behave. Like, people are tired, people are sometimes inebriated, people are sometimes getting yelled at by their daughter in the backseat. I appreciate the safety benefits. One of the things that's on my mind is how my household went from 2 to 1 car, thanks in part to a flexible work from home arrangement with my employer. And I see self-driving cars alleviating the need to own a vehicle. And looking much further out, this is very speculative, but alleviating car ownership has the potential to alleviate needing residential parking or office parking. And this is a huge share of the real estate usage, land usage in San Mateo County and residentially in my neighborhood. And I don't expect people to be going off selling all their cars. I'm not short car dealer stock or whatever, but I do expect people to decrease their usage of their own automobile in lieu of using self-driving fleet vehicle. And I wonder if you expect the same thing. We could quibble over the rate at which it will happen, but
Sure.
And I'd be curious to know who you think will use it. Who are the marginal riders who drive today, who will ride in self-driving fleet vehicles tomorrow? And whether they're commuters, whether they're errand runners, whether they're shepherding children to school, which is a huge transportation demand generator,
Sure.
is the mandated 5 days a week in schools. So who do you think are the marginal riders of autonomous vehicles, and what trip type will they cannibalize or take market share from?
Yeah, we got another hour, right? I'm just kidding.
We got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, and I don't mean to, just because I'm the gray bearded one of the two of us here. I mean, before podcasts, not very long ago, car share was, a new concept, right? Car share especially in urban areas, right? Car shares around college campuses. You didn't have to have a car. You could just use the car share, Zipcar, a number of the various car share providers. And I think what I heard you describing was the neighborhood use of a shared fleet vehicle. Now, you brought in autonomous, but the concept of a shared vehicle, so you didn't need to own one, and you would decrease your use of a vehicle if you didn't own one, which is true, because it's expensive to rent them or to use them. But that idea of car share has been around for a very long time. Now, autonomous takes it to another level. But when you're asking what trips are going to get swapped out because of autonomous, well, I think it's more what trips get swapped out in that car share mode, right? If I can get an autonomous vehicle that's going to take me to Costco because I don't have an SUV to do my Costco shopping, right? That's similar to what they were using Zipcars for, right? You would use it to go to Home Depot and load up your stuff because you only had a small car or no car, and you were using it for that. So I think it's a swap there between what you're doing, but that's not really the autonomous nature of it. I mean, in my utopian world, I see the real benefit of a program of autonomous, especially in the Waymo, as being like almost like what if a city managed the program, or a public transit agency managed a program, and they geofenced it. And they said, you know what, these vehicles, these autonomous vehicles, stay within a basic geographic zone, and they will go to the library, to City Hall, to a BART station, a Caltrain station, a ferry terminal, a shopping center. That's it. That's where they go. They don't go to frivolous locations. And if you want to go to Top Golf, which would be fantastic, that's not what these are going to be for, right? They're going to be more community-based mobility services. And they're going to be autonomous. They're going to be safe. And hopefully they're going to be shared, right? You, if you're using one of these vehicles, especially if there's any kind of public dollars in it, should be willing to share that ride with someone else. And it would take stress off of some of the bus routes that really don't need to have a big 40-foot coach, right? Samtrans runs a program right now called Ride Plus, which is a on-demand van style program. And there's drivers and it's shared rides. And it's very possible that 10 years from now, those types of services are provided by autonomous vehicles. But I don't see them as long haul, long distance. Of course, the private sector can do whatever they want, but in the public sector and from a TDM perspective, if I could use those vehicles and figure out how to make them shared, autonomous, and connecting to transit, now we're talking about the first last mile connection that currently we provide with big shuttles, right? But this would allow us to get into a lot more places, a lot of different places. But the public would need to be not treating it like their private Uber or Lyft, but in a shared mode, right? Or Waymo. I mean, Waymo right now is a private, single person or single trip platform. I just see the opportunity for autonomous as being something that is helps us solve the mobility challenges and does create that opportunity for seniors, for safe, child transportation situations, without the need for additional cars. And we're not really gonna, is it different than an Uber or a Lyft? It could be, especially if there's public dollars involved in it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate you taking a swing at what is a very speculative technological development that's we're still living through.
And like I said, I think the technology is going to be there. I have no doubt that we're going to get there from a technological perspective. I just want to make sure that I hope that the public's expectations of what this is going to be don't get set in like, this is my private limousine. Mm-hmm. Right. And I would really hope that there's an opportunity for that public-private partnership and use it again as a first last mile solution.
Got you. Well, with our remaining minutes, I would love to hear you give some homework to our audience as to looking up their own TDM agency where they reside. Maybe give them some guidance on how to figure out what it's called, what do they do, get a little bit more familiar with the equivalent of commute.org where our audience members might reside.
Sure. It is difficult, only because we are not the same no matter where you are in the United States. So there is I would point, people that are interested in learning more about this industry in general, especially if they have an interest in pursuing kind of career in this sustainable transportation area. Our national organization is called Association for Commuter Transportation, or ACT. They're at actweb.org. And that's a really good place to find in your local region who might be serving those needs. And so typically it's going to be at the county transportation level. A lot of times that's where you'll find it, or what they call another one of those acronyms, the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization. In our case, that'd be MTC. And we do get support from those types of organizations. But wherever you are in the country, you can find an MPO. But the ACT website, I think, would be a really good place for people to start their looking.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on and speculating with me and also just sharing what all you do at commute.org, John. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, if people want to learn more about commute.org, come to our website. It's the same as our name, and participate in the Commuter Challenge. It's one of those behavior change opportunities that we have coming up in April and May. And no matter where you are in the country, check it out. Maybe you can provide inspiration for the local TDM agency in your area.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Thank you.